Welcome everyone to our November Australian Microsoft 365 Adoption User Group. It's actually been a couple of months. I vanished, didn't I? But I had a good reason. I did tell you before leaving that I would have a good reason for vanishing. Just like to remind you that this is actually being recorded and that will go live up on our YouTube. You'll be able to find the presentation. Both myself and Andrew's also linked into this particular presentation. I've put all of that link into chat for you, and I might just come in and pin it as well so it stays to the top of the chat if you're looking for it a little bit later on. So welcome one and all. Good to see you all and good to see you back. Don't forget we've always got, the reactions and a few other things there to be able to interact. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we're all meeting from today, should you be, across Australia, and those from other nations. And I'd like to acknowledge and respect the elders past, present, and emerging, and I do extend that respect to any Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islanders peoples who are with us today. Okay, code of conduct. I always ask that we be welcoming, open to all the questions. There aren't any silly questions in this user group. We don't know what we don't know. Please feel free to put them into chat at any time. So just be kind and understanding, patient, considerate, and also use appropriate GIFs and images and a few other things in our chat as we go along the way. Okay. My name is Kirsty McGrath. For anyone that hasn't actually been on a session before, I have been running the adoption user group now for well over 8.5 years. It's been a while. Right. So what have I been up to? I always start with some of the new things. Yes, I have done a ton of cakes recently. We always have a bit of fun in regards to the cakes. I've done a couple of lessons and cookies and birthday gifts, and everyone was a bit freaked out at the restaurant when they started digging spoons into what looked like real cactus. And so I had a couple of people and servers coming up going, "What are you doing?" I thought I was eating dirt. So, but we really weren't. So we had a bit of fun. I went, and one of the reasons I didn't do the August user group was because I was at the Digital Workplace Conference. So I had a fabulous time at the conference. There were so many people that I got to hang out with. I spoke twice. It was a great conference, and we've got our next one coming up, before too long. It's also over in New Zealand, as we like to say. For anyone that is over there, if you wanted to join in sort of for the New Zealand side, then we've got the Australian. It's always a fabulous conference to actually go and get involved in. Hey, I did say I was going on leave for a month, didn't I? I was traveling right around the UK and Ireland and went to Paris. So what did I do in those couple of weeks? So over 30 days, we did nearly 5,000 kilometres. So we're doing 300 Ks a day of the 20, not all of them, because we didn't have the car for all of the days. On average, sort of 12 to often 14,000 steps. We visited a ton of cities and so many hotels, got to see some really cool stuff along the way. And as you know, I went over to support my disabled mum and take her on a nice big holiday and see some of the sights. So I was driving a great big van and we were putting her in and out, and it was 6 a.m. days till 11 p.m. nights. We did all of the great icons, all sorts of fun stuff, and the Eiffel Towers and Wimbledon, hung out with the king. We tried to be princesses for a day. We got our crowns on. There were so many photos. I took like 7,500 photos, so I'm not going to bore you with them, but did some cool stuff. We did Moulin Rouge in Paris. We did Rivers Dance when we were in Dublin. We did Tina Turner at West End, and got to see also Edinburgh Tattoo when we were in Edinburgh. So we got to see some pretty cool stuff while we were there. Had my birthday while I was gone, so I got to be princess for a day. We stayed in a castle for the night, and I had spent the day on the Britannia. We went and had a look at it and had a lovely high tea, and they even gave me a little nice pin that I can actually wear to say happy birthday. So I had some cool fun stuff. For those that are right in, we did Beatles type stuff. Game of Thrones fans, we did so much Game of Thrones stuff as we went along the way. And then some of the cool part about going with someone that's actually disabled is, I don't know if you've ever seen the Mona Lisa at the Louvre. That is often the crowd that you see. We got to go completely around them and go in front and stand right in front of her. So it was one of those sort of very cool moment. And that was my first day in Paris. And then on pretty much my last day was going through the front gates of Buckingham Palace. So that was pretty exciting to come right through, straight past the guard over here. And we it was a bit of a trippy moment. All right. So that's a bit of getting started. Now I'm going to do the what's new course at the end. So much content, but we're very lucky to have with us Andrew. Andrew is coming in. He has, we've had him and his team, Alistair as well, in terms of designing collaboration, speak with us in the past about their book, and some fabulous skill sets there around collaboration, and it was like trying to decide, which way to go. But, considering we're very into hybrid, there was a few different topics there that we looked at. I've put the presentation link in. Now, you do have the presentation, it is in chat, and I am going to hand over control of the screen to Andrew so that he can actually present his desktop. Oh, he can't hear you, Andrew. You're still on mute.
There we go. Thank you, Kirsty. Righty ho. Let me go now. Pick out my presentation, and I'm going to have to share my screen, aren't I? So let me get this up and running, and hopefully I have a seamless experience. My broadband went down during a lightning strike last week, so it is. I'm stealing my neighbour's Wi-Fi at the moment, which hopefully will hold up.
I like that. I should have done that when Optus went down, hunting for someone.
Yeah, well, absolutely. No, so it's working. I've got my emergency phone to tether if I don't. So.
Oh, good. Well, we'll see how you track.
Yeah. All right. Let me just get these up. Sorry. Excuse me a sec. Righty ho. Here we go. So with the power of stolen Wi-Fi, thanks everyone for joining. So this is a bit of a kind of, it's about hybrid, but also it is quite a hybrid presentation in that we're not just looking at the digital skills, but also the habits as well, because a big part of this is putting together how we use the technology functionally wise and what do we do as humans in there. So we'll be kind of looking at some new habits as well as the technology. And the point of this is about empowering hybrid teams as well. So if you're into command and control, this might not be for you, but if you're wanting to sort of embrace what hybrid can offer us in terms of the opportunities, then this hopefully will be a bit more relevant. And it's a big area, so I've tried to limit it to a few areas where we can focus on some specific actions that can help start the journey, because totally empowering everybody is a big leadership shift. So we'll look at some things that help give us a bit more of a say and a bit more control in how we use the technology. And for those of you who don't know me, hello. So you might know Alistair. Alistair and I have been working together since around 2015. I originally started out as an environmental scientist, which is where I kind of learnt at the receiving end of technology and business processes in terms of what worked, what didn't work. I'm eventually evolved into knowledge management and innovation manager roles, which have kind of brought everything together. What are the cultural issues that we can change? What are the technology issues we can change? What are the frustrations and how can we start to solve them? And all of that has sort of helped build up design and collaboration. Alistair came in with his experience and we wrote a book. Well, he mostly wrote the book. He did all the hard work, so he takes most of the credit for that. But from that, we also developed quite a lot of other content around how do we actually apply this? What does it look like in terms of a framework? But then what does it look like in terms of specific skills and activities we can adopt to be more collaborative? And the world has changed a bit in the last few years, so very much the focus shifted away from innovation and more into how do we actually perform as a digital hybrid team. And so the last few years, that's really the kind of work we've been doing, which is around more recently simplifying Microsoft 365. So how do we actually take control of the tool set from a team perspective? Because it's, there's a lot of technology there, and for many of us, it's a bit of a struggle. So quite a few different areas I've been focusing on, but generally around collaborative working, simplifying how we work, owning the tool set, and empowering the teams to make the choices in how we do this. So back to today and back to hybrid, where apparently it's not going to continue. We've been told we're going to be back in the office in 3 years. It's destroying our careers. We can't collaborate. We can't work together. It's all bad news for those of us who like a bit of flexibility. But the reality is that pretty much everybody knows that hybrid is here to stay. We want it. We want it to increase. We want more flexibility in how we work. And we expect that's how it's going to be. I think all the noises around going back to the office are generally coming from the golf courses and the boardrooms, and not from people who are actually on the ground. But even managers, HR managers, there's a huge amount of expectation and certainty that this is here to stay. And as much as the politics of the office are driving the conversation, the reality is that we have the technology and we have the skills to be able to work more flexibly. So let's do it, because people want it. And one of the things that I think that really jumps out to me is why we need to be empowered is we've all been disempowered. You can probably think of examples at work where you could have done your work much more better if you hadn't been told to be in the office when you didn't need to be. Or I mean, I've early in my career as a project manager, I had my own small projects, my own budget, and I was able to go off and run them, and they were doing well. I was beating budget. My clients were happy. The work was being done. 5:30 on a Friday. I'm like, right, I'm done. I'm going home. But my operations manager was like, no, you have to stay. We've got to stay. We have to work more than our 38 hours. That's just how we work. I'm like, well, I've done my work. I've been working hard, but it's done. Some weeks I'll work longer, some weeks I'll work shorter. Does it really matter if on this particular day I have to sit at my desk doing nothing for an extra hour? And this is a bit of a cultural legacy, but that expectation of that we have to be at our desks doing work for the whole time. And with hybrid, this has kind of made it very messy, because our desks can be anywhere, but also our work doesn't have to be at the computer. Our work is thinking. It's the time maybe we spend away from the computer. And as we'll talk about, there are some more issues around setting boundaries, and empowering us is really important, because otherwise trying to control a flexible hybrid working environment doesn't really work. We need to be more autonomous in how we make decisions. And I'm sure you've got plenty of experiences yourselves of when you didn't have that control and it didn't work for you. And this is what we're trying to shift a bit here. And I'll be coming through a few areas on how we can empower around asynchronous working, setting boundaries, having team charters, improving meetings, and building and maintaining relationships, building trust, and some of the habits that leaders need to adopt. So these areas I'll be looking at. And please jump in with any questions and Kirsty, if anyone posts any comments, please, would you mind reading them out?
Absolutely.
To me?
More than happy to read out. Please feel free to ask questions along the way.
Yeah, I'm very happy to be interrupted, and then you don't get to hear me droning on the whole time. So first piece I would say would be asynchronous work as a really important tool in empowering teams, and for generally just hybrid work as well. And maybe I'll ask a little question if anyone has an idea of how much time in terms of percentage of the week you think we might spend in collaboration tools. So things like Teams meetings, in chat, in channels, in email, the stuff where we're collaborating with our colleagues. If anyone wants to have any guesses? And for those of you who are on tenterhooks, I can 30% from Lynette. Okay, kind of, that's not bad if that's what you get. 45%. Okay, thanks, Kirsty. 40%. Now, this is obviously, I'm going to give you an average, so what you might experience might be a little different. But according to HBR, 85% of our time, of most people's work weeks, is spent in what we call collaboration. So spending time email, chat, phone, video calls, which is huge. You know, when I read this, that was kind of surprising. And you know, how do we actually get work done? You know, collaboration is great, but maybe is there too much collaboration or too much of the wrong sort of collaboration? So, and this maps to, you know, some of the workshops I've been working on, where I'm working largely with teams and stakeholders and people who are trying to deliver work. And you know, we look at barriers. What are the issues that are stopping them from being truly flexible or truly collaborative? And a number of issues keep coming up, which is inconsistent communication, where we're getting bombarded with emails and chat and channel notifications and you know, meeting requests, and you know, possibly for the same thing but in multiple different methods. And that's causing, yeah, it's adding to our collaboration overload, but also it's really confusing. You know, why do we prioritize notifications from? There's an in-person bias, largely from, you know, people in the office are front and present in mind, so people can actually, you know, they're there to be seen, so they can sort of dominate the conversation. Whereas if you're at home or remote, you know, it's harder to have that visibility. Inflexible meetings, that's a big barrier, because if we've got, you know, lots and lots of meetings booked in through our working week, flexible hybrid is fairly inflexible because we've got a lot of you know, solid activities that we have to be present for, whether they're needed or not. A lack of coordination between the teams, so a lack of awareness of what we're up to and what we're working on. And lastly, we don't have the time to work it out. How can we make it more flexible? How can we make things? So many times it's like, we just don't have the time. We can't just take time to figure it out. And you know, the reality is this will save us time, but we need to find this time from somewhere, and that's proven very hard. So asynchronous work is a great way of starting out. It's the secret sauce. And for those of you who are not familiar, asynchronous work is really not working at the same time with our colleagues. We're doing things, we're working together, but not necessarily at the same time. So yeah, we are, for an example of this, is email as an asynchronous tool, but although we're led to believe that perhaps it is slightly more synchronous, you know, when we get an urgent email and you have to respond straight away. It's more delivering work over a longer period of time where we can be more flexible in how we respond and when we respond. And you know, a great way of looking at this is meetings, because we have so many meetings that are urgent, supposedly, and we have to attend, but perhaps they don't need to be. And it's a case of looking at what routine work can be performed asynchronously. And I'll give some examples of what this can look like. So, you know, a classic example are repeating meetings. So status update style meetings, such as daily stand-ups, where we're not really having a conversation. We're just going around the room in terms of what are we doing? Who are we talking to? What are the barriers? Yeah, what are the issues we're facing this week? That doesn't necessarily have to be live in a Teams meeting. That can be done as a thread in a Teams channel. And really, it's a question of just thinking, what are we trying to achieve? And are there better ways of doing it? So if we're really just trying to have awareness of what everyone is doing, that doesn't have to be a meeting. There are so many tools in Microsoft 365 that can help us do this. But also another key message is that we don't have to just dump everything and go straight into asynchronous. We can start small. And a great example is meeting notes. So meeting notes, before, after, during a meeting, you know, that offers us an opportunity to start doing some of our work asynchronously. So let's say we're asking for contributions before a meeting. Perhaps we've got some comments to raise after a meeting. They can go into meeting notes. So then we don't have to always just be at the meeting. There's an opportunity to contribute before and after. And for anyone who wants a little example of how some of this can look, for like, say, a status update meeting, instead of having a Teams meeting, yeah, we can easily do this in a thread. You know, whoever's leading the meeting can ask the questions about what do we want to surface. So what are we doing? Who are we meeting? What are our barriers? You know, is there anything that's keeping us awake? What help do we need? And then we can do this in a thread. And it's probably a good idea to time frame it. So, you know, let's say we want to do this before, you know, midday, before 2 p.m. So yeah, there's a deadline, but it doesn't have to be this solid lump in our calendar where, to be honest, we're not listening to what most of the people are saying. And with meeting notes, yeah, meeting notes very easily to do. You can in your Outlook calendar, for your event, you can send it straight to OneNote, and then you can start to have collaborative notes in OneNote for this particular meeting. Very, very easy. OneNote is, I love OneNote. I think it's a great place for sharing and working on draft content. But very soon, I mean, if you've got it, it's in public preview, but we're now having collaborative meeting notes in Teams, which is going to use Loop. And collaborative meeting notes, great. You basically, when you're creating your meeting, you can select add an agenda everyone can edit. So this will be rolling out to everyone soon, I do believe. And so nice, because then it just adds a Loop component into your meeting. So it's there in the meeting chat, it's there in your meeting in your calendar, and anywhere else that you want to share your Loop component. And you can add an agenda, you can add notes, you can add tasks, and anybody who's in that meeting can add to it, and any tasks that are added in there will then sync to do. So it starts to pull everything together, but add in some small asynchronous ways of work to your meeting, which I think is a really great way of starting. At the moment, it's only going to be for internal meetings. I don't believe it'll work externally, but when this rolls out, this will be a fabulous piece of asynchronous technology. And really, probably the last thing I'll say on asynchronous working for now is Teams is the perfect base for this. This really needs to be where we try and base everything. Asynchronous work will thrive if we are consistent in how we use Teams, and that we base our work in channels. So we have all our conversations in a Teams channel instead of email or chat, and that helps us, give us context. They are where they need to be. We're bringing everything together. We can add all the apps we need in a Teams channel. We can, we're not distracting people with pop-up chat conversations. We're putting everything in the right place. And you probably know this more than I do, but very simple. If you're setting up Teams channels, make them around what you do. Here's an example of for an operational team. You have a channel for each thing that team does. You can create them for project teams as well. And here's an example of what a project team could look like in Teams channels, where you've got a channel for a particular phase of a project, and you have the conversations in there that you would instead of via email, asking questions of the team, sharing what you're doing, needing help, sharing draft deliverables, all of that. If that's in Teams, that's get into these habits, and then it will make asynchronous work a lot easier. If we're using different tools and things in different places, it's really hard. Where do we find stuff? I mean, asynchronous work needs rich content. We need the content, and that content needs to be easily discoverable and easy to work with, and Teams channels are perfect for that. Okay, so the next area that is really, really important is boundaries. We've probably all experienced it, particularly with COVID, is that we lost our boundaries. We lost that sort of the boundary of the commute, the boundary of going home, switching off, and the workday has got longer, largely because we are not commuting. And sometimes this can be really helpful, because when we can do work later in the day if we want to, but we need to set up boundaries if we're going to do that. If we're working later, do we have to start earlier? And there's another area where we're being impacted, where we're losing boundaries, is the increasing use of things like chat. Now, chat's great. I love chat, if it's a quick one-on-one message, because you get people's attention. And Swoop, and I'm glad Laurie's here, because he's, I think a lot of what Swoop have published has been so useful in terms of learning about what are the bad habits we're experiencing in our workplaces. We're processing a minimum of 32 chat messages a day. Now, think about that. You're in the flow of work, you're doing something, you're thinking, you're focusing, and then a chat message pops up, and it's really hard to ignore. I find it, it's really hard to kind of go, no, I'm just going to leave that alone. I'm just going to carry on. And by the time you've read it, responded, or parked it for later, and maybe you've done a reminder, suddenly it's like, oh, I've lost, 20 minutes or so. And this is another area where boundaries are so important around how we work, because like the notifications and the always on demands reduce our effectiveness. We are, and this is very much, there's a lot of research around this, and also just anecdotally in workshops, everyone is struggling, that we're under assault from notifications, from demands, from the amount of tools we're using, and that makes work really complicated. So probably Simplest thing to do is try and agree one common tool for urgent communication, and everything else can be less synchronous. So let's say we agree, let's just use chat for if it's urgent, and then we don't use it for anything else. Keep it nice and clean and simple. And we've also blurred our boundaries in terms of the lack of physical boundaries. It's hard to fully disconnect. And a big part of the problem here is a lack of expectations, that we're not really sure of when we should be available and when we shouldn't. And yeah, that's the default. If we don't talk about it, we don't really do anything about it. So I've been in workplaces where I've got in early because everybody else in the team gets in early. I don't really want to be in early, but I feel I ought to be because, you know, the boss is going to be impressed if everyone's in early. And if I'm coming in half an hour later, you know, is that going to make me look bad? Of course, the boss doesn't care at all. But if we don't talk about it, if there's no expectation of, like, you know, what's the working day like, then we tend to make assumptions, and we need to be very clear and unambiguous that we're not expected to be available out of hours. Yeah, if we choose to be, that's fine, but we're not expected to be. We need to be safe enough to share when we are on and when we're off. And for hybrid to work, that's absolutely vital because, yeah, I might want to pop out for a walk. I might want to go and pick the kids up. I might, you know, just need a bit of a break. And if we don't share that, yeah, it means that maybe if something's urgent, might not be contactable. We might also feel stressed that if we're away from the computer, if someone is trying to contact us, are they going to be judging us? Are they going to be feeling like we should be there? We should be working. Yeah, we need to be able to say safely, I'm just popping out for half an hour, for an hour, and I'll pick things up when I get back. If it's urgent, call me. You know, things like this, getting this out into the open visibly, so we're all aware of when we're out, where we are, and if we're not available, and that's okay. Because really, the 9 to 5 isn't that important anymore. It really doesn't matter. If you need to, if we are working in a you know, in an environment where perhaps we're frontline and we have to work in shifts, then okay, that's a different matter. But if knowledge workers don't have to be there 9 to 5, then why should we be? And so, yeah, a few areas that, you know, can really help is just thinking about sending a message at a different time if it's out of hours. You know, we don't necessarily want people to react if they don't have to. You know, if it's not urgent, do we really want them to see the message straight away? We're thinking about, you know, how things impact others. Perhaps we want to share details of when we're available and when we're not, so that people know when not to bother us. And maybe we just need to respect our status. You know, I don't know how many of you here have, you know, set your status to do not disturb, but you still find people will call you up because I saw you on do not disturb, so I couldn't send you a message, but so I thought I'd call you up. And it's like, you know, we need to have these conversations around protecting our focus time, because we don't have enough focus time. And for hybrid work to work, we need time to focus. Another great thing I've come across in an organization is to encourage collaboration in the office. They would basically encourage the day after an office day to be no meetings. So let's try and have as many meetings face to face in the office. Then the next day, if everyone's going back home, let's try not to have any meetings. Let's just allow people to have that focus time, because this is something that we are missing. Okay, the next step, team charter. Now, this is something I've always felt has been important. And since running workshops with teams and stakeholders, this is a card. This will be a card I would use in pretty much every workshop I run, as allowing people to choose. You know, make some choices. What would you like to pick out of this option of cards to improve how you work? And this one is always picked. This one is always probably one of the top 2 cards in every workshop that participants choose. They want a team charter. They want something that agrees how we work, because without that, yeah, we have so many tools, so many practices that aren't agreed and are totally inconsistent. And yeah, we're all crying out for a little bit of consistency, because ambiguity really is the enemy of hybrid. We need to choose the basics of how, where, and when we work, because hybrid isn't black and white. And, you know, unfortunately, it's often treated like it is. You know, we have a rigid hybrid where perhaps we're in the office 2-3 days a week, home the other days, and that's okay. But that really doesn't give us that much freedom. And what if we are at home, and how do we work when we are at home? And how do we know how best to get in contact with our colleagues? How do they like to be contacted if it's urgent? You know, these things really need to be agreed. So in terms of team charters, I found that focusing on 4 areas, well-being, location, communication, and meetings really helps. So agree some norms under each of these, and they can become a team operating manual. So for example, what do we always do face-to-face? What is so important that we get together for? Also, what assumptions do we have? What can we pass on to a new starter? Because think about first day when we join an organization. What are the things that we really want to know? You know, what are the unwritten rules about the team that perhaps take us weeks or months to articulate? And agree the role of certain tools. So what is the role of Teams chat? What is the role of email? Is email for external collaboration only? You know, it's a case of trying to understand how we're going to take ownership of the technology. So as an example, this is a format I've created for team charters using cards that people can pick themselves. And they're around meetings, collaboration, communication, well-being, and location. And these are just some examples. For example, we might set limits on how long meetings are. We might set ideas on, you know, when we use chat. Perhaps if we're in a hybrid meeting, if one person's remote, we all join separately. Now, these might not be for every team, but one team might go, yep, I want this one. Another team might want something else, because every team is different and every team will have different preferences. And it's so helpful to actually sit down and work out what are the things we want to do. And, you know, some of them are specific, you know, tangible, like the length of meetings, and some of them are just more around the culture. You know, do we value the quality of our work over the time we spend doing it? And having these conversations can really help a team feel safer in a hybrid working environment. And maybe I'll just ask before I move on to the next one, has anyone here done a team charter? Is that or something similar with their team where there's an agreement on some core practices and use of technology?
Yes, do it all the time. One
Oh,
of the first
great,
things
Kirsty.
we need to do.
Good for you. Yeah, absolutely. But it's surprising how many people don't. And it takes time. You know, there's a barrier because we have to invest the time to do it. And sometimes we need a starting point. We need some content. We need some ideas of, you know, what are some practices that we could adopt. But yeah, for those of you who haven't done one, it's great. I mean, it really is. It's a nice team working activity to do anyway. And if anyone wants a template, I've got a template in Mural, so feel free to ping me and I can send you a link. So next thing around hybrid is meetings, or crappy meetings, particularly because yeah, we still have these sort of archaic working practices that go back, you know, hundreds of years or so, where we still coordinate a lot of work through meetings when we really don't have to. I mean, meetings are great. They are powerful when we're having a conversation, when we're trying to solve a problem, but we don't necessarily need a meeting for everything. But also, yeah, we need to know how to run meetings as well, because a bad Teams meeting is a really, really time wasting and frustrating format. You know, I've been in meetings where there's so many people there. How do you speak? How do you get involved? How do you actually have a conversation? And this is the crux of the matter. So, yeah, unsurprisingly, only 50% of meeting time is effective. Now, what is effective meeting time? Well, you know, that's very, very ambiguous. You know, to me, it might be one thing, to someone else it isn't. But, you know, really, it's about conversations. You know, a meeting should be about people talking. And it's not just talking about what we're doing, it's also talking about who we are. There was a great article last year or the year before about how we need to make more time for small talk. Small talk is what makes teams thrive. It's how we build relationships. It's how we build that network. And that is such a powerful thing to do. And particularly since the pandemic, we focus quite a lot on productivity and less so much on just the conversations around, you know, who are we? What do we do? So, yeah, so important that meetings have conversation time. Yeah, I always find that time before a meeting or the time after a meeting, when you have that little kind of chat with people that are early, is great because you get to meet new people. The other thing I'd say is record and transcribe. Get into the habit of recording or transcribing meetings. So, for those who can't make it, we can have a recording available or transcription. And when you're ready for Copilot, transcriptions are going to make AI far more effective, because we need content. Without content, Copilot's going to struggle to really make a difference. But if we've got transcriptions, then Copilot can actually start to help us cut through some of the meetings and find some actions and tasks and relevant material for us. But even if we're not using Copilot, again, asynchronous habits, transcribing and recording meetings can start to make some of them more asynchronous. And perhaps, if it's a presentation, we can record that and share it, and don't expect people to actually join. The other thing around meetings is around engagement. So if we are having a truly collaborative meeting, there's research that if we are not required to interact, we disengage after about 6 minutes. And that's not surprising. If we're not thinking, then we're going to start doing something else. So so obviously some fairly obvious things here around using whiteboard if we're going to gather input. Use loop if we're going to be working on a decision or agreeing action items or gathering and voting on ideas. And I'm a big fan of loop. I think it's really nice. Here's an example of running a voting exercise in loop. This will just go into your chat, and anyone can add an idea, anyone can add pros and cons, and then we can all vote on them. This gets people involved, and sometimes just throwing in this sort of activity can help keep the conversations going, particularly if we are largely joining in from home, and particularly if you've got larger numbers, that maybe getting this conversation is hard. There's also other tools that we can use. Yes,
Andrew,
hi.
Doug Lawrence
Yes.
is asking, do we know sort of maybe what the optimal maximum number of meeting attendees might actually even be, excluding kind of meetings like this one where we're kind of bringing everyone in? Any thoughts?
Yeah, well, I mean, I go back to the Jeff Bezos's is it 2 pizza rule? Oh, is it now since interest rates have gone up now, is it just 1 pizza? But the size of a team should be fed by 2 pizzas, so keeping team numbers pretty small. And really a meeting, if it's a team meeting, I think the same kind of rule applies, that keep the numbers small, that if you can feed the amount of attendees with 2 pizzas, then you're probably on the right track, because you can have it's small enough to be able to have two-way conversations. I don't know what everyone else feels, whether even that's too many, or whether you've had a good conversation with 10 to 20 people. I don't know, but
It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I say, a good performing team is sort of around that 7 people. So when you start to put more and more people into the team, it doesn't quite perform as well, unless they're broken into sort of chunks. So you've got to think it's going to be a little similar.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, and it's also hard, if you've got everyone with their camera on, how many faces can you really see and kind of keep on top of during a session? And I certainly I'm of the opinion now that having a camera on for everything is not that useful. If you're in a meeting with 20 people, 30 people, perhaps that's an opportunity to turn your camera off for a bit and have a bit of a rest, because
cognitive
seeing
overload.
all these faces. Yeah, it is, absolutely. But this is also things to think about. Are our meetings effective with more than 10 people? And it might be worthwhile thinking, well, who's actually there that's going to join in? If we're not expecting people to join in, then maybe we don't invite them. The other thing that's really important is how we facilitate a meeting. If we are having a hybrid meeting where some people are in the office and some people are remote, if we can facilitate that and know how we can ensure everyone has an equal voice, great. But if that's hard, and facilitation is a hard skill, perhaps we should consider making everybody join separately. So even if you're in the office, you join on your own machine, so everybody has the same experience. I mean, it's obviously the in-person experience is better, but if we're struggling to bring in the remote voices, then we maybe need to change how we run them. And here's just a few other ideas around meetings, because I think meetings is an area where there's so much opportunity to improve. So I'll give everyone a minute or two to have a look at these cards, and perhaps see if anyone wants to shout out with any of these that they've tried or they'd like to try. So number 1 is around recording presentation style meetings rather than encouraging people to join live. Number 2 is getting a team member to facilitate a meeting instead of the team leader. Number 3 is crowdsourcing the agenda. So rather than having a fixed agenda that's maybe repeating or is set by the leader, perhaps asking for input into that. And number 4, we mentioned around turning your camera off after too many meetings, and maybe turn it on if you're just talking or you're meeting new people. Or number 5, reduce 30-minute meetings to 20 minutes and reduce 60-minute meetings to 50 minutes. And that's a default we can set in Outlook. So I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on these, or any of these would stand out as something to try with your team. And now we're particularly with Loop coming into meeting notes, then yeah, crowdsourcing agendas is much easier. So sorry, there's a comment around.
I've had a question of, isn't it rude not to turn on the camera? And it's interesting. There's some real thoughts around that, especially because we're dealing with, as we like to say, the neurospicy, and a lot of people don't cope with it in terms of getting into cognitive overload and gaze misalignment and all the other components that come with it, and it can be quite exhausting, especially at the end of the day. And the more we're hybrid or working from home and needing video on, we get a fight or flight because we're up so close to a screen. We go into kind of a fight or flight type mode, which puts a lot of people into high anxiety. So there is a component of turning it on. Turn it on, absolutely. If you cope with it and you love it, it's great to have the interaction. I know it's very hard for us. We're often presenting to a blank screen all the time. So it's nice to see a face and nice to have someone smiling back and interacting and seeing how they're feeling. Hey, man. So, Lynette, I appreciate you turning on some cameras. So it's always nice to have cameras on, but I do know that it can get a little overwhelming. So, yeah. And it depends on how many people there are. And that's why there's some great different views as well to try and help reduce down some of that exhaustion inside teams.
Yep, absolutely. No, you're bang on there, Kirsty. I think there's a lot of research that shows that seeing your own face as well, it adds to that cognitive overload.
Yeah. And a lot of people don't realize that they can go into Teams, click on the ellipsis on their camera and go hide for me, because it draws your eye to it. So therefore you get distracted by your own face anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. It is distracting. And it's, again, a team charter is a great way of setting out some norms. Or when do we have our camera on? Are there situations where it's okay to turn it off? Because sometimes, we don't know. And sometimes people will by default will have it off, and some people by default will turn it on. And then you start to get inconsistent ways of working. And consistency is really, really helpful. I love seeing people on camera. I really, really love seeing faces. But
as Melinda also says, you can turn off people's cameras if you don't want them looking at you. So you as an individual can turn it off if you're not coping. So we can have them on, and then as an individual, we can work out whether you want to have videos coming in or not, because you can in your settings go and turn those things off.
Absolutely. And like everything, it's nuanced. Hybrid work is so nuanced because you can't just apply blank rules for how we're going to work.
Have we lost you?
Oh,
no,
hello.
Temporarily dropped out. You just temporarily dropped for a second. It's all good.
Oh, okay, good. It's probably my neighbours probably watching Netflix now. So, but yeah, everything is. So if you missed it, I was just saying that everything is so nuanced that trying to apply one set of rules to every team to work exactly the same is impossible, because we have our own preferences. But trying to agree as much consistency as possible is really helpful, and just taking some ownership of how we work, rather than just relying on unwritten expectations, which may or may not be right. We might be doing things that actually nobody else wants either. So next one is around building and maintain relationships. Now, there was this stat here really kind of hit me quite hard, is that a feeling of being disconnected from our colleagues is top reason cited for burnout at work. And it reminded me of the importance of having healthy relationships with our colleagues, whether it's a social network of just colleagues that are there as friends, they're there just somebody that's on our side, or whether it's a professional relationship of colleagues that are there that we can ask for help, that will help us solve problems, or somebody that we can rely on in tricky situations. And we've focused really well on the team lately. I think we've kind of done quite well to build team connections in particularly remote situations. But what about people outside of our team? And Yeah, there's a couple of areas there that I think really important to consider. So firstly, what's important enough to meet face to face? What do we really have to meet in person for? For example, is it meeting new starters? It doesn't have to be. You can have great inductions remotely. We can also have terrible inductions in the office. I've spent many a new job sitting on my own at a desk, browsing the internet, reading manuals. A waste of time really, because you learn nothing. So yeah, it doesn't have to be in person, but perhaps for your team it is important. It's agreeing what do we get together for that is face to face, and it might be just once a month we get together for something, and a team charter is a great format for doing this. But then going back to the sort of the professional network beyond our team, we are becoming more siloed. I'm seeing this in my workshops so much that we're focusing on the team and lost touch with colleagues beyond that. And across the board, finding experience from beyond the team is a top 3 priority for every customer I've dealt with. We are struggling to get that help we need from outside of the people we know. And this is a hard one to solve, because in the days of being in the office continually, we start to organically build a network. We get to know people. I've been helped out so many times by just meeting somebody, a random person who, years later happened to have a skill that solved a tricky problem of mine. How do we find these people? Something we can do relatively within our control is inviting people from beyond the team into our meetings. If we've got some other teams that maybe are downstream or upstream of us, invite people into these meetings. They might have some interesting insights. That's a fairly easy thing to do. But what about people, sort of on a more day-to-day basis? It's really important to invest in digital communities, and I've highlighted the word invest there because communities really need help. They're something that are incredibly powerful, but they need help. Community management really makes them thrive. And this is an area that our Swoop have been really great at surfacing around, particularly the latest benchmarking report on Viva Engage, which shows that active participation is down to only 27%, so this basically means that the number of people who are actively in a conversation in Viva Engage is 27%. So most activity is more communication based. We're pushing out content, people are reading it, which is fine. Viva Engage is very good as a communications tool, but also Viva Engage is brilliant as a community tool. It's absolutely perfect for hosting groups around topics around work or employee resource group type communities where we're representing perhaps certain more personal interests or backgrounds of people who might want to come together in a particular group. These are really underutilized in Viva Engage, and where they're used, and if you download the Swoop benchmarking report, which I think came out last week, there's some great stories of organizations that use communities and use them really well. They have purpose, they have a real value, and they are across different teams. They're very, very diverse. But the key thing is that they're actively managed. People want them, people own them, community managers put time and effort into them. And I am seeing this as a big risk area, that a lack of focus on communities is going to cause some problems when we have tricky problems, when we need to reach out beyond our team. Who do we find? How do we start to share the problems, ideas? Where do we feel safe enough to have these conversations? Because to be honest, the all-company feed is a terrifying space. It's not easy for somebody just to post a question in front of the whole organization. It takes a bit of guts to do that. And so really coming to the last couple of things, culture of trust is probably one of the most key things. This is less around the technology, more around how do we feel empowered? How do we feel trusted? And how do we trust the technology we're working in? Because evidence shows that this is from the latest Microsoft Work Trend Index, probably maybe early this year or late last year. We feel very productive. 87% of us feel we're productive at work. However, our leaders don't share the same sentiment. Only 12% have full confidence that their team is productive. This is a huge, huge mismatch. This suggests that our leaders don't really trust us when we're at work. And yeah, we need to address this, because for hybrid to work, we need to close this gap. We need to feel trusted by our leaders. Our leaders need to have confidence in us that we're productive. One area that can really help is that if we make well-being a priority, that we know that genuinely our leaders are wanting to look after our well-being. That's why if they're say doing one-on-one check-ins, it's about well-being and not scrutinizing our work. So yeah, it's a subtle difference, but if our leaders are checking in with us just to check that we're okay, that do we need any help, are we struggling with anything, rather than what are you doing, what's your schedule like, that sort of stuff can be more in the open. We can use tools like Planner for this. We need to really focus on outcomes, not where we spend our time. So if we're coordinating work in Planner rather than constant check-ins, then everyone's work is in the open, and the check-ins can be more focused on just making sure we're okay. For leaders, celebrating failure, really important. Start with your own work. What is going on? What have you messed up? Start to be open and honest in conversations in teams, because this will help us to be more open and honest ourselves. And I think a key thing is always, for leaders particularly, don't always lead in the tools. Don't always start a conversation in Teams or in Viva Engage. Listen, respond, ask. And again, Swoop has given some great research on this around the power of asking questions. And if you're making a post, say in Viva Engage, if a senior leader responds or likes that, that's empowering us. That's making us feel, okay, this is, I'm encouraged to do this. So we need people to listen to us as much as to add their own content. And a few other examples of how leaders can help us to be more empowered. Does a manager need to be in every meeting? This is a good question to ask. I've been working with a senior leader, and they've been experimenting with just not attending their regular team meetings, and with really great outcomes. The team have been thriving. They've been just generally been able to get a lot more done, because they're not having this bottleneck of everything having to go through one person. Even if the manager isn't necessarily there to make decisions, we tend to default to asking them and needing them when perhaps we don't really need them to be there. So empowered teams don't always need a manager, but we need to decide the role of the manager. Do we actually need the manager to make a decision? And things like Delegation Poker are a great resource. It's a free thing to download. I use it quite a lot, where we try to agree what's the role of the manager, where do they make a decision. So perhaps we will consult them, perhaps we will fully delegate. These are things that we can start to think about, but at a very simple step, perhaps just not being in every single meeting and stepping in if you need some help with a decision is great. Otherwise, we can use things like forms. I mean, forms is so powerful for helping to come to decisions. This is an example of consent, where let's say we're trying to make a decision, but we want to make it as easy as possible. Then perhaps we just want to make it largely possible if everyone is broadly agreed. Even if we're not in general agreeing, but we can't think of anything better, then it will go through. And if somebody is disagreeing with it, they have to come up with an alternative course of action. So it's a way of helping make decision making easier for a broader group where perhaps the manager isn't there. Now, this might be a few steps down the line, but there's so many techniques that we can adopt. Some of them are in Microsoft, some of them are not, but there's lots of things we can do. But it's asking these sort of questions. Do we actually need the manager there, and how can we use the technology to help us make decisions? And lastly, you'd be very, very glad to know we're down to the last one, is really leadership habits. What are the everyday habits of our leaders that can really help empower us in our digital tool set? So firstly, consistency. Stick to the agreed technology. There is nothing worse than we're agreeing to use, say, Teams channels, but the manager still keeps emailing us. That is just the worst thing they can do, and this happens all the time. And let's avoid email if we can. Let's avoid spontaneous chat messages unless it's urgent, because these sort of things can really, if our manager suddenly sends us a chat, we're going to look at it. We're going to respond, even if it's not urgent. They might not mean it, but trying to come up with some better habits, really, really helpful. Visibility as well. We really need our leaders to be visible in their tools. So we rely on the visibility of what we're doing and the conversations. So for leaders, ask questions in Teams channels. Narrate our work. I love this term, narrating our work. I can't really use working out loud because John Stepper will probably charge me a few $100 to just to quote that. But yeah, if we're narrating our work, we're talking about what we're doing, who we're seeing, what we're working on that day. Encourage others to do the same. Coordinate tasks in Planner rather than in individual conversations. So start to put things out into a more collaborative and visual space. And really, lastly, understand that everyone has an equal voice. So key role of a leader is to bring quiet voices, whether it's into a Teams channel or into a meeting. This is something that we need to be asking ourselves in every meeting and every conversation. Is everybody involved here? Who isn't involved? How can I bring them in? Because these are the new skills that we really need right now to make hybrid work. If we don't have these skills, leadership is going to be a lot less effective, or we're just going to have to rely on command and control, which is not great unless you're Mr. Vader here, which works well for him anyway. And lastly, the power of the at mention for leaders to be at mentioning people in Teams, in Viva Engage. Let's get out of email. Let's get people into the right place. So if your team leader is working in Teams channels, at mention colleagues to bring them into that place and not email. I think that's one simple technique that I think is not necessarily appreciated. I'm kind of surprised at how many people are not fully aware of how we can notify others in Teams channels and in Viva Engage, for example, and that there's still a belief that email is the only way to do this, and we need to be aware that perhaps we might need a bit of coaching and education on alternative ways to do things. The at mention is a powerful tool, maybe not quite as powerful as a lightsaber, but it'll get there. So that's broadly the areas that I see a lot of value in trying to empower people in hybrid working. So hopefully a couple of things have stood out that maybe you'd like to try, or you've tried yourself. So I'm pretty much done there. So if we've got time for some chat or questions,
any other
Kirsty?
questions, just throw them into chat, and Andrew can sort of answer some questions. Thank you so much, Andrew. It's a quite a fascinating topic and still very relevant. I know we were talking a lot about it, so through the pandemic, but this post pandemic and what it actually looks like now is a bit of a challenge for us as to should we be back in the office a whole heap more or not? What does it take? So I know I certainly get questions around it, and we've had a lot of people asking in regards to the link to your team charter. If you've got that, throw into chat for us, and I will put it into the presentation and a few other things. That would be fabulous. I know a lot of people have really been asking for that one. You'll see some of the questions in there. So I'm going to.
What I can do is sorry, Kirsty, I'll just have to do I'll put in a mural template link, and then if anyone has problems, they could just drop me a line. You might need a mural account for this, that's all.
Okay. Radio. So I'm going to go in. Thank you so much for that. It's great.
Oh, not a problem.
Feel free to hang around. You get to see what's new right across Microsoft 365 adoption, as well as the technology. And yet again, I say, every month there's a lot. I think October was out of control, and it could be because Microsoft Ignite is coming up, so they're putting all their announcements out now so that they can kind of talk about it in depth and get roundtables and some discussions and a few other things going at the conference. But feel free to stay as long as you like, because there is just a ton of content. Don't forget the recording is there if you do need to go. So thank you everyone that is in and willing to stay around, and anyone that does need to get going. Okay, so some cool stuff, really some very cool stuff that's come out over the last month. And I know we've had a big year with some of the recent rollouts of technology. Let's get in. So don't forget, you can go into the YouTube channel, so you can go and watch the recordings at any point. I will go up. I generally put them up within a couple of days or so, depending on how we go, but I do put it up there for you. There is now 117 videos, and I see Shari is here. Hi, Shari. So Shari is regularly on these collab talks along with Christian and a few others. We answer questions for the community. We got a whole heap more that's about to come out soon. So we're always sort of out there answering community questions. So there's lots of different topics you might be interested in. The release notes around the Microsoft adoption page, if you ever want to know what's happening, because the adoption site itself is just getting kind of bigger and bigger and more information. So this is where I often go and try and find out, a bit about, what's actually happening in the adoption space and some of the updates that are there. Some of it's just little tweaks or it's in another language that aren't necessarily as relevant, but let's walk our way through. We've had our champs calls that have actually gone out. So I've put all of the links in here. There are packs that you can download. Caruana and the team come in and talk their way through, some of the new stuff. There is an adoption mastermind event. Now, if you're up to getting up at 3 a.m. to join in the call, it might be one to have a look at. It's being run by Microsoft. It's coming up. The next one is in January. There was one just recently. And of course, I wasn't around to give you guys a bit of an update, but one to go and have a look at. There's some new Viva Engage resources on the site. It's got the guide in there, the Viva Engage guide. It's a rather cool little sort of a couple of pages that you can download to help your community put it into learning, for example. There's some user analytics that's actually now extended to bring in search. So if you're looking into sort of some of those adoption pieces, it's going to be focusing on things like, what are some of the gaps around, is there search activity going on in terms of the engagement? Is it actually expected? What does it look like around searching in the gaps for applications itself, like looking for those? Searching based on regions or departments, or where are the lags? Do you need to do training to actually help people around search? Because I know that it's one of the things that can be a bit of a gap when it comes to user education and adoption of certain technologies, where they can't kind of find stuff. Considering we spend on average around about 26% of our time searching for information, that is a day a week, guys. So education. So if we can find some of those gaps, always go in, have a look in Tech Community. A lot of what I put in here all comes from Tech Community, but there's also the Tech Community YouTube, which I haven't necessarily talked about before. So you can always go into the Tech Community YouTube and have a look. Lots of information in there. Some of the latest videos have been very much around sort of Viva. So there's some cool stuff in there around Viva if you want to know. Of course, Copilot, hasn't that been the big, that's kind of really hit us now, gone out live as of November. We've talked about Copilot and a lot of content in the past. There is the adoption page and plenty of information in there. What I particularly liked is under the adoption manager. So if you're looking at the resources by role, you can go and download the full adoption kit. And in that full adoption kit, you've got some cool stuff in there, including a workbook that you can actually work through, a ton of links to content. I particularly loved the persona kit it's pretty cool. How to bring in and build your own center of excellence, which we have been working with Microsoft as MVPs. What are the things to kind of see in there as a center of excellence? So some fabulous stuff in there, strategy examples in terms of working forward. So there's some cool stuff. Go and have a look at the pack and pull it down if you want to go see it. Okay. If you want, Microsoft have actually got their understanding their own digital transformation journey. So there's a blog that's come out, and it's also got a ton of links on there of how they've actually gone through it themselves. So it's a latest blog post that's there. One I would recommend going and having a look and a good read through, because it might give you a bit of a help in terms of even things like that experience of the hybrid world, and what that looks like. We've just talked about it, with Andrew. So a few things there to work your way through. The season 8 is now out for Inside Teams, with the very first one on season 8 being the Copilot deep dive to go and have a watch. So Derek Snyder has now put that up there. So go have a look at that one. Learning Pathways has had some content updates. The main big one, I suppose, for the recent September, there was another one sort of not that long ago, but it's all around the Viva Engage and all those Viva components now coming in and dropping into Learning Pathways. Because at one point, sort of Learning Pathways stagnated a bit and we weren't having any of the new links and content going up. So it's good to see it's getting its legs again, because it wasn't kind of being let go when it came to Viva Learning. We're sort of like, we're not going to focus on learning pathways. They're going to focus more on Viva Learning, but now it's coming back into play a bit more. So good to see some of these updates flowing in, because I know that it's been embedded in a lot of organizations. And if you haven't dealt with learning pathways, it is a SharePoint plugin. You can just download it from GitHub and you can plug it into your own environment and customize and build your own sort of learning portal using the Microsoft standard content, and it just links to all of their online learning. Okay. Microsoft have brought out their virtual event playbook. We have talked about this in the past, but now it's got a lot more content available, including some of the example scenarios of why you might use. So it's a bit more, I suppose, to pitch to those that are a little bit more into the advanced. And there's also a bit of an interactive version there of that playbook as well, in terms of the events to be able to help and support you. Okay, so these are more for those quite highly produced type events that you might actually be running. Okay. There is I think this is the new one or it's an old one. I'm trying to remember in the screenshots. The Viva Engage New Teams campaign kit that's actually come out as well. Okay. The events catalog. So Microsoft have now put up the site where it's got all the events catalog pulling in from all over the place. Look, there's a whole heap that is technical that's actually in there, but there's also some that's not technical in there under the Microsoft 365 space. Or if you're dealing with Surface, for example, maybe you're rolling out new Surface devices. I would recommend going and have a look. A lot of this is actually free and you can attend some of them, and it will put it in the Australian Eastern, daylight savings time now rather than standard time. You can start to see what those timings are should you wish to join in. There's plenty of free cloud training events out there, so you can always go and have a look at what you might want to get some learning on. All free, plenty of content that you don't need to go for formal education and pay for it when you could potentially do it for free. Okay? So lots on the adoption space. The what's new and coming to 365. Okay. I've said strap on in every month, but this one really is a strap on in, crazy, insane amount of stuff. Now, okay, what's coming to 365? And a lot of this is important because we've got an education piece we need to think about for our end users, or we've got to plug it into our learning sites, or, maybe you have a, digital experience platform. How are you going to get some of this information out there? Really important. But 365, its actual main starting screen, there's a little bit more now coming around customization so that you can actually pin and get your information pinning. So we're getting a bit more of that customization coming back again in terms of the app bar when you first log in, and on that navigation on the sort of the pane, that pane running down the left-hand side. Admins can't play around with that. They can't override the user's choice. So that's actually flowing out now. The what's new for Teams. If you're in the new Teams app, which I currently, we're in here on the new Teams app. If you're in the new Teams app, they're now doing a little pop-up. So it tells you kind of what's new to Teams. You can at any point go into help and go and see the what's new, but now it's physically coming in as a bit of a bigger, fancier pop-up in the new Teams environment. So not Teams Classic. This is in the new Teams, which is now just rolled out as well. So there is also a link. This is off the back of a site that you can go to see what's new as well. So I've put the link in. Replying to a specific message. Look, we had it on our mobile phone. We've had it in, certain scenarios and in meetings, but now it's starting to flow through more and more into our chats. So that's now on the new. And some of this is because it's based on Teams New, where it was missing some of those features and functionality compared to Classic. So if you're kind of going, hang on a second, I thought we already had that. It's more now I'm going to start moving over and talking more about the Teams new environment, okay? Compact chat mode has come into play, so you can kind of change the spacing a little bit more in your chat, and that way it's not as spread out. Blur in the background. So as part of recording a video clip, you can actually then, change a little bit now and put in the blur, so you can make your background a little bit more confidential when you go to do recording of your clips. Okay, so I do like that, keeping things a little bit more confidential around you, and it's not as noisy. When we've got webinars and we're publishing our webinar, we can actually go into OneDrive, and as part of this feature that's flowing through now, you'll have your recordings in there, and you can then go select publish, and you can actually extend it, and then that way you can have your attendees automatically. And I'm back. Dropped off there for a second. It's like, that'd be right. So then this is all about webinars, by the way. So this is webinar recordings, so that you're familiar with the webinar recordings. Okay. We've also got, of course, the what's new. There is a Inspire blog that's come out around what's new to Teams. So if you want to have a look at that, there's a ton of content in there around what's new in terms of Microsoft Inspire. So what's going to be talking about. Now, I will talk a bit more about Microsoft Inspire at the end, but it's coming up for us Thursday and Friday. So it usually kicks off about 1 o'clock in the morning. So it'll run for 2 nights in a row from 1 a.m. to approximately 11 a.m. Usually the last meeting is usually 10 o'clock, finishing at like 11:40, something along those lines now. So if you wanted to, Microsoft, no, this is Microsoft in Ignite. Is it Ignite or Inspire? Ignite. Oh, this is the what's new from Inspire that was on just recently. Ignite is coming up at the end. Thank you. It gets so confusing. They're so close together on their wording. But yes, you're absolutely right, Paul. Thank you. Inside Teams, our blur options. It's not just standard blur anymore. You've got standard and portrait blur. Okay, so we've got 2 types to choose from. Portrait blur creates a bit of depth of effect with a bit of sharper focus and more subtle blurring of the background. So we've got 2 types of blurs now. Who would have thunk? Okay. Webinars and town halls. There's a lot coming out around town hall. So the live events is retiring. So if you're not familiar with that, that is retiring. And we've got town halls coming into play. So the town hall capability actually now has a new template coming out that is a capacity for up to 10,000 people, 15 concurrent events in a tenant. You can have other third-party support, green room management. So in terms of the attendees, a moderated Q&A, live captions, there's lots and lots of things that are coming into play. Now, the advanced functionality only comes, though, with a Teams premium license. So if you have a premium license, then you can have then 20,000 and 50 concurrent, as well as some of the other different things in the email templates. And, there's lots of features and functionality depending on which way you go and what type of a license that you actually have. But the free version still gives you, a pretty decent amount of attendees, for example. Now, the People app has come into play in Teams. So if you go into go to the left rail running down the head side, you click on the little 3 dots ellipsis button, you can go and search for the People app, and you can go and pin it to your bar, and it helps you to be able to find people, a bit like we have in 365, Microsoft 365. If you go to office.com, we got the people. That's now flowing through into Teams, so you can sort and filter and find them as needed. Okay, so inside Teams, another app that's come into play is the Meet app. Same thing again. So you can see here, I've put it, click on the ellipsis button, search for Meet, and then you can go and pin it. Now, the Meet app brings together all of the content from your, recent and past meetings. So you can find things easily. So it could be, documents that have been shared, loops, transcripts, recordings, all those things all come into play. I love it. It's rather fancy. I kind of go, it's not, but it is, but it not, but it is. I think it's just having that one single pane to be able to go and find things afterwards. And there is some cool features and functionality in that as well. Like, I would highly recommend going and having a look through what are the functionality. So in the blog here, lots of stuff. I just had to stop how much I was putting in here for you guys. Okay. we've got a revamped channel coming in. We have talked a bit about sort of the new teams and what's that's actually looked like. So the revamped channel environment and what it looks like. Let's have a look. You've got popping out the posts. So you can now come in and do a right click and you can start to then pop out posts. You can pin a post and so it will also then flag it as important. We've got a revamped compose box. Okay, so that compose box, you can also choose whether it goes to in your settings to go to the top or down the bottom, because we had it at the bottom and then it moved to the top, and I think there was a bit of pushback, but now you can actually choose where you see your posts. So if you are doing training and you say go to the bottom of the screen and you can do a compose the message, it may not actually be that case. People could actually choose it and put it to the top. So just be aware of that. Okay. The information pane over on the right hand side, so that you could do even search directly in. You got your member list and particular pinned conversations that you might have put in there. We'll bring it in as priority on the information pane. Your compose box, this is the one I was talking about, top or bottom of the channel, so you can flip the orders should you wish to, depending on where it goes. Enhanced inline search. So when you do a search, you can do it through that information pane. Your search will actually come up now in a pane, this window pane running down the right-hand side to keep it in context rather than going to another screen. Do you like it? Yeah, Shari, I know the top's at the top at the post at the top seems like it will work, but I think those that have been using it for a really long time have just really liked it down the bottom. So yeah, we do handle it in that way in our email and lots of other ways that we do it. So I agree. Yeah. Now, we've got the general availability, of course, of the Teams app now. So it's actually out there in terms of what we're using, getting in, having a play around with it. It has nearly full feature parity. It took a little bit till I really started going over to it more and more. There was a few things that weren't quite lined up between the Teams Classic to the new Teams, but it's really kind of come into line a little bit more now. You can preview, it's still preview in terms of the web client around sort of Edge and Chrome. So there's some overviews there and some of the prerequisites that you need to have, and sort of what are some of the issues around the browser based for new Teams. So a couple of things to keep an eye out on. Okay. Now, the classic team. So they did do an update. If you tap on your Windows key and you type Teams, you might find that it's had a name change. Now, it depends on your organization and the cadence of rollouts, but it will actually say Teams Classic, so Microsoft Teams Classic. And so what's happening, though, is that will actually retire effectively from March 31st, and you will be automatically pushed over to the new Teams. So you're going to need a plan in place for user adoption around the new Teams, because it will push out. So it's going to effectively be retired. Okay. Now, with that auto kind of push out and the general availability, just note that the VDI in terms of its environment is not quite sort of there yet in terms of the virtual desktop. So it's not going to automatically do the push and update. Same with Teams meeting rooms and Surface Hubs. They're not actually going to be affected by this at this point as well, okay, in the timeline. The co-organizer experience, there's been some updates in webinars and town halls. You can actually have a co-organizer now, so you can do your event scheduling. They can change some of the details on the page, like titles and all of the above. They can publish and also cancel the event. Okay. Shari, are you having some issues with the new Teams crashing? I can't say that I have had that when it comes to video. Not sure if anyone else has actually had any issues in regards to it, but I actually have heard I've heard of one other person. So I did recommend maybe having a look at the device and the camera and the age of devices, all sorts of things. I can't imagine you'd have an old device, Shari, but you never know. Custom backgrounds for announcement posts in channels. Okay, so when you do a post, you can do the announcement post. If anyone doesn't know how to do an announcement post, you can actually go click on the little A in your announcement posts. You can change in there whether it's a post or announcement. In fact, in the new environment, it's actually got them laid out side by side. Is it a post or is it an announcement? Now, with that, you can actually do a little bit more customization. This is using Designer. So Designer is now integrating into 365 more and more, and you're going to start seeing it flowing through. So this means you can make quite some little custom announcement post pictures and a few other things. So I'm really liking that because I like to use announcements. I use them all the time. The choosing when to notify. Okay, so in terms of publishing of a task. Okay, so that task publishing experience, you can choose and notify a little bit differently. Okay, so it can go, okay, when notify each recipient, notify individuals, when are you bound to publish it, and put it through. Now, web links, when they open up in Microsoft Teams chat, they are going to open up into the Microsoft. They used to kind of go the Microsoft Edge, and the Teams chat will come in now side by side, a bit like we're seeing with Outlook. If we click on a link, it goes online, and then it brings up the information as part of the new pane, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. So it does the same now. When you click on a web link and you go online and it's using Edge, that chat will actually come up and will flow through as well. Okay, so the sidebar. Setting out of Office for Teams on the mobile application, so that's now flowing through. You'll see it there as part of your presence to be able to just do it directly in here. Now, there's a few updates that are coming across Android and iOS. I haven't put them all in. It's one to go and have a look at. There's lots happening there too. There are new cool shortcuts, so the keyboard shortcuts that are coming into play. So there's a couple of changes there on key shortcuts. So if you've got them in your presentations around how to do calling and what are the shortcuts, Alt-Shift-A to initiate a call. I know, Harry, you say, yay, shortcuts. Alt-Shift-V for video calls. Now, if you're on a Mac, they're, of course, a little different because you have an option button, but there are new keyboard shortcuts, so keep an eye out on that one. There is addition of the chat button in missed call activity. So if you're in the activity, you can see the little chat button there. It used to just have a call button, but now you've got a chat button that actually can go beside it in calling. I like that one because sometimes if it's internal and you've missed a call, you may not want to actually call them back. You might just want to go, hey, you were trying to get a hold of me, rather than, okay, so it's right there now. It's a quick and easy ad. Love it. New gallery has come into Teams meetings. So we've got lots of different galleries. It's been a bit revamped. So we got a 16:9 aspect ratio. There's an audio video mix sort of in terms of the gallery and the way that it's actually working in terms of the audio quality. Meeting rooms are going to be displayed a little larger. So because often we've got a lot of people in it, so it's going to give it a bit of priority, I suppose you might say. You appear next to the rest of the participants. And then there's some customization that you can actually do as well. So you can choose the number of tiles, the placement of your tile, prioritization of videos, and that meeting room tile size as well. So there's a few things coming into play in terms of video for you to be able to play around with. We just talked about video and some of the exhaustion we kind of have. So now we're getting a little even more power over it. So I do like that. The creation of teams. It's becoming just that little bit easier. At the top of the channel, a plus button coming into play. So we might see a few people kind of clicking on it, especially if we've turned off team creation. So it'll be a little interesting how it will act and whether it will, drop off as a button if you've turned off team creation, or whether the plus button is going to stay there. Because I think it would need to, because it's got, as part of the plus button, it's a create a channel as well. Okay, so creating teams, creating channels are going to actually be in there. Okay, so if you've got screenshots inside anything, so many updates to your screenshots in training or online or help guides or FAQs you might have, like on wikis, for example, inside your business. Of where to create a new team, press the button. Instead of having it running down the bottom, they create the team and join down the bottom. Oh, yeah. Microsoft Teams emojis and GIFs, they're all coming together under one picker. So you'll be able to find them all in there together. So that's coming out fairly soon. Forwarding messages in Teams chats. Now, we had it in channels, but we didn't have it in chat. It has now come into play both on your mobile phone as well as your desktop environment and online, so that you can now forward a chat. It will do it a little bit like you have in your channels, where it goes forward this message. You can include other content as well to be able to sort of drop that all in before you then forward and send it off. But like all things, be respectful of the things that we're, sending off to another. When we start to forward anything, I'll always put that caveat in, whether I'm training or not, just be nice. Okay. What else? Private team discovery. Now, end users can discover private teams. Now, it depends on the admin settings, something to keep an eye out on, because if it's there by default, it could get a little spooky. So yeah, one to really get on top of. Okay. Workflows within the Microsoft Teams chat. So now you can come in on a specific chat itself. You can actually click on the ellipsis and then select workflows, and you can kick it off directly from that chat now. I am liking some of the features and functionality. Things like, for example, setting up, planner or task management, or maybe it's a Twitter, or it's like in any kind of workflow. It's you using your Power Automate. Okay, so many things that you can do. The in-meeting error messaging. Now, we were having issues in the past, like if someone came in from another tenant, they may not be able to see chat, for example. There was some limitations around it depending on policies, external parties, and you had no idea why, whereas now they're actually going to throw up an error message and tell you a little bit more around why. So we don't have some of those struggles. There's going to be a new view as well around sort of 9 videos, a 3x3 in Chrome and Edge, because there was limitations around video for our web base. So that's now getting some updates. Now in the beta, so this is if you're on Insiders, you can go and have a look at this. There's some engagement that's actually coming into play, and it is sort of in that kind of getting into if you want to be in the public preview, and you have to have a Teams license as well. And this is through the web. And if you go online, you can then start to have a look at things like reactions, for example, their engagement with you. So how engaged, how long, how many likes, did they have their video on, how many times they turned their video on. So some rather cool engagement pieces around your meeting. Okay. And the attendance piece. Right. Teams mobile, if you are trying to do a quick capture, now when you're doing this, you can actually take a screenshot. So in your mobile, when you go into your ellipsis, it goes, do you want to do a quick capture? This is like your snipping tool for your mobile phone to go snip something. They've just talked about this, and then you can actually share it or save it and bring it down. Now, sensitivity labels, of course, will, come into play. So, can you do that or can't you do it? So you've got to, look at those sensitivity labels. Now, Teams calling, you can now have a private second phone number, okay, that you can have in there for a select set of callers, so they can call it directly, bypass, delegates and admins and things like that. It does have a unique notification in terms of the pop-up and its ringtone, but it only supports incoming calls. It's not for you to do sort of outgoing. It's all about those incoming calls to go around. Okay. Teams rooms. When it comes to our Teams room, a few changes. The video, the spotlighted participants center stage, it makes the active speaker a little bit larger. So we're starting to see that enhanced video coming through. The event console as well. So when it comes to Teams rooms, live events was having some issues in regards to our Teams rooms. So that's now flowing through. And of course, with that live event, we'll have it flowing over to town halls and a few other things over time. Stream. Now there's a few things going on with Stream. The Stream app in Teams will display only Stream content. It will no longer display the Stream Classic content, so that is stopping. The Stream Classic is actually retiring. So, and it's retired across a lot of the web parts and all sorts of stuff now. It's already done. So you're not going to be able to pull in that content. So if you haven't migrated it or you haven't looked at it, I highly recommend, because they're not going to see it anymore. Okay. Coming soon is the transition to the Stream app that's actually for web and mobile. Not quite there yet, but it's coming soon. Okay. You can now preview and play your stream videos directly in the chat and channel without having them go to the browser. So I'm really, liking that. It started in July, but it's moving right through. It hasn't quite rolled out. It was supposed to be finished, but it has had an update to mid-November. Okay. So it's still coming out for some of you. You can add, there's so much stuff now that you can add into Stream. We're starting to see some of that feature parity that we were getting in the Stream Classic that we weren't quite getting across OneDrive and SharePoint. So we can now drop in surveys, polls, and quizzes at specific times in the video. So you can get in and edit and drop those in. So you can go to the forms and play around with it and have it in some timeline markers, for example. There is adding hyperlinks and text callouts at specific times across the video as well. So loving having that come through, so we can start to get our stream videos a little bit more interactive long after we've actually left that particular meeting, or especially when we're doing some of the bigger events where we still want to continue it going on the likes of Viva Engage even, and other areas. Okay. The automatic transcription. So now when you do your video upload, so if you load a video up, it's finally doing automatic transcription, and you don't have to load the transcript to kind of go along with it. It will just pull it in. So thank you. I know it's one that I have been waiting for a little while. Another one is in terms of OneDrive, so many changes coming down the line to OneDrive, by the way. Now, we have touched on this in the past, so I have talked about it back previously. There are a few things that are different now, but there is a whole new generation that's coming into OneDrive. And it's not just OneDrive as the online, it's OneDrive for the desktop version. It's OneDrive and sitting in Teams, a ton of stuff. Let's have a look at some of it. And one of the things I've highlighted here is on the blog, there's actually a guide. It's the new OneDrive Quick Start Guide. It's really good. It's a quick, easy one. I think it's 6 pages long, and you can just send that out as part of a link for training, for example. It's got lots of great content in there as a guide. Okay. Now, what is there? Oh, look, I put a ton of links in. There is a new meetings view coming into play. So in OneDrive, it's got the history in your docs, not just the Meet. Remember the Meet app? It's also going to flow over into OneDrive in Teams too. Okay, so it's in there. It's got a people view in there as well inside your OneDrive in Teams. Got a shared view, colorful folders, favorites, shortcuts. There's a simplified sharing experience that have all come into play, a ton of stuff that's actually sitting in the app inside Teams. So some of the features. We can browse the files by the meeting. So when we say you can see your meetings and it's collating everything together in one place, it really is bringing it all together. In terms of some of the other functionality, across the OneDrive piece, you can actually have it. It's coming into Outlook. It's got offline mode coming in. It's got a media view. Do love the media view. And there's other content that's coming into play soon in regards to Copilot. So I've put the links directly to the guide as well, and a couple of the other newsletters there. So the other File Explorer enhancements, let's have a look. Okay, the details pane. So if you're on your desktop environment, so this is the desktop, it's part of those sync enhancements. You think of going into our File Explorer, for example. Yep, so your little yellow folder, go in, it's flowing through into the desktop. So it's not just about the online environment. In Teams now, we're starting to see it flow into the desktop. So our information pane has got even the share button now coming through on the information pane and lots of other related information. There is a simplified setting that's come into play for the sync client itself. So it has structurally changed just a little bit. That has had a couple of iterative updates lately. Okay. There is a podcast that's actually come out. Okay, it's now up to episode 5 if you want to listen to the latest podcast. So it's one to go and have a look. I know, Lynette, the transcript can do some interesting things to be able to edit, doesn't it? I know I've seen some classics over the years, even on my own. It's got the joys of an Australian accent sometimes. So many things that we shorten. Okay, there is a deep dive. So this is actually it's like a blog guide on OneDrive with lots of great content for your end user. So you could actually, plug that in as a news page on how to use OneDrive. So it's a good deep dive blog. What's new to SharePoint? Let's move into SharePoint. Okay. Now, some of the features I've already spoken about because it was sort of more OneDrive, or it might have been Stream, or but it might be, and the back end might be SharePoint kind of thing. So it just depends on what I'll bring in or not if I've already covered it off. Okay. One of the ones that have actually is flowing through when it comes to SharePoint is the search. And it's actually got a new video tab that's coming into play around search. So it's a dedicated place for you to be able to bring all that information. Okay, so this is all part of the sort of that Bing experience. So if you go to Bing and office.com and the SharePoint, and so it's all flowing in as part of the share. Okay, in Bing. There is in terms of the web part release, so the classic is retiring, of course. So it is done. Okay, so it's retired. If you need a web part in Stream, it's now the new web part. So all existing ones that were originally there is still continuing to function as normal, but I would highly recommend, please go and look at that migration to get those videos over from the old Stream part, because it is now retired. And there will be at some point or other, it will be you won't be able to see them anymore, and you're going to then start having issues. So start moving them over, please. Video inline in terms of that content web part. Okay, so when you're dropping in, there's the web part, it drops in, it's now going to play inline next to the content as part of the configuration. That configuration is with a carousel. So it's got a film strip. So if you've not seen the kind of those film strips where you can sort of scroll across, so you've got sort of carousels, and so you can do one at a time or scroll over in one column or two columns own. Okay. There is some out-of-the-box document libraries that have come into play. So I find this one quite interesting. We've often had just a blank library, but now we've got from an existing, it is going to be sitting in both sort of that, creating in our SharePoint home, so that new document library, or if you're in a site and going into site contents in the back end, so you can go new and document library from the back end as well. And the types are blank, from existing, then you've got templates. Okay, so there are templates in there that you could just pick and choose, but there are also ones that have got then those flows, so there's automation dropped into it as well. Like for example, the media library and invoices actually have flows as part of it. Now, of course, if you've got flows turned off, so if you've got automation sort of turned off in the business, Power Automate, then they're not necessarily going to work for the business. So it's a couple of other things to take into consideration there. But some great pre-built templates to work with, liking it. Loop. Now, a lot of this it was actually spread out across, OneNote and a Stream, or all over the place. And I've pulled them all together as its own topic because it's sort of on the blogs and it's included in a blog on a particular topic. But I thought it would be better if we bring them together. Now, Loop has come in and flowing into channels. We have touched on it before that it might be coming. Great to see it's finally there. We've had it in chat. It's been sitting kind of in that personal space where it's saved into OneDrive, but now it's actually flowing over finally into our channels. So then we can cut and paste across to emails and other supported apps, for example. So you can create the post, you can collaborate on it. It's going to sit in the SharePoint site in the Files tab if you're going to go and look at it. Okay. Now it is available across all of the different types of channels, so standard, private, and shared. It is not available for externals to view. So it is not there. Okay. Now you can view it on your iOS, but not Android. Can view, not edit. Okay, they will be able to open it to the web, but they can't actually create either from the mobile. So you can't create from there. You can only view, you can't edit. What else? Collaborative notes in our Teams mobile. So what we can do is have our agenda and notes and action items, and from our mobile, we can go in and they will actually sync as well, so we can see them, and they can then assign those tasks, and those notes are going to then sync through with To-Do and Planner. So we got collaborative notes on a mobile. Viewing and editing those loops directly in OneNote. Okay. So we can access our meeting content and our recap all dropping into our notes. Now, if you're looking at the recap and it's all AI generated, don't forget it is a Teams premium functionality. There is collapsible sections as a part of it. It'll have all different sort of context and information in there. So it's good to see Loop coming in across our other applications now. We've got our collaborative notes in our Teams meeting recording. So don't forget, you can come in, you've got view and editing those collaborative meeting notes when you're actually even watching the meeting recordings in Stream. So they're interactive as part of Stream to be able to continue to work. So Loop workspaces. Now, what we need to take into consideration with all of the Loop functionality, whether it would be in SharePoint or our, OneDrive, wherever it happens to go, it is now going to start counting towards our storage quotas. Okay. So in the past, it wasn't, and now it is going to be capped. Okay, so we get our 5 GB is the maximum size in terms of the workspace in public preview. You can create any number of workspaces. Okay. And in the past, they weren't counting towards it. But now we actually have that 1 TB. It's all part of that 1 TB max size, and it is counting in. So this is kind of what it used to be and what it's going to be now. We've got our Loop components flowing into Whiteboard as well. So we'll be able to have all those checklists and information and trackers all in our Whiteboard. Okay. We have specific links. Now, in the past, if you had turned off company-wide links, so if you've got that disabled and it was to a specific person only link in the past, then what would happen is we'd start to have some real issues in regards to that in terms of the sharing. We'd start to, not be able to do it. We get, error. They just couldn't get into it. Whereas now what happens if it's a specific person, there is a fallback. Okay. So at least now we know kind of what's actually going on. Okay. So that fallback makes it a little bit easier. It's not for external users though. Okay. This is for tenant. There are new post types in terms of Viva Engage. If you're in there, we've got our articles as a new post type. There's some great information in terms of how to do that kind of article in the link if you wanted to go through and have a read through what article types.
Yes.
Sorry. Oh, hang on.
Sorry.
It's okay. No. There is a new version of Viva Connections coming. Okay, so that homepage, it's having a bit of a refresher. Go and have a look at the new version of Viva Connections homepage. There are new cards for Viva Connections. You can have them sort of anchored at the top of the feed and targeted to different employees, particularly good for when it comes to news. So there's some of these new cards. Now, don't forget, a lot of these features and functionality do come with also premium. There are some new network analytics in terms of Microsoft Viva to try and improve some of that sentiment and activity and trends and what's going on across Viva Engage, across the communities and conversations. And this has had some great changes over time. So we're starting to see more and more coming into play in terms of that activity. We can now draft and schedule posts for later in terms of Viva Engage. Yay. In Viva Amplify, okay, so this is now the latest edition. We have touched on Amplify. It's now generally available. We were talking about it when it was in public preview. It is now out there. So this is that centralized place that we can actually do all our campaign management around communications so that we can kind of have everything in one place to kind of go through, okay? So there's some information there around the deep dives, how Microsoft is using it, as well as I've put in the community if you want to join the actual community so that you can ask questions and learn a little bit more. Now there's going to be the new Viva homepage. Okay, so this is rolling out. You'll have a new Viva homepage. So if you go into a browser and you're coming in and you're looking at your, we call it kind of the waffle up the top, you sit on the waffle at the top, you're going to have a new Viva page where it's got it all laid out, all the various components all coming together in one view. I do really like this rather than having it, each one as its own separate. Okay. There is some meeting details has actually having a refresh. There is a ton of stuff coming in OneNote. I really love what's coming down the line in OneNote, and with having some of those meetings with the team, there is some good stuff there. Now, meeting details is having a bit of a refresh. So over on the right-hand side, you've got the pane now coming up, so that it makes it a little bit easier to be able to work with your meetings and drop them in. So there's a bit of a refresh there. There is enhanced text, pen, and ink gestures. So there was that, we had some issues in terms of, what was the old Windows app. So we had our Windows app, and then we had the original sort of OneNote 2016 where the two were coming together, and this is sort of the first one. You're very welcome, Andrew. Thank you for joining us. Appreciate it. So these new ink gestures have come into play. So please note that it's only based on the new OneNote. You will not have it if you're using the Windows 10 app. Okay, so that was the lighter version app. So some of the features that were in there are rolling over, and they're now coming through. Faster note taking and text prediction, just press your tab key or right arrow, and it's going to drop in your text prediction. There is some new layout options, so you can decide, where you want your tabs to actually be sitting. So you can adjust them around. There's also, of course, the whole Copilot piece. Okay. Now, Copilot also comes, don't forget, with your subscription. You have to have subscriptions to Copilot to be flowing through, but you can start to then see how you can drop in some really great content in with Copilot. You can stream your videos directly in line. So there's your stream videos. They will now play directly in without having to click on a link to go to stream, which would be in OneDrive or SharePoint now, not stream, unless you've still got some Stream Classic, but they're going to actually play in line. When it comes to forms, some changes to forms is a live presentation experience. Who uses anything like, you can throw up your hand. Who uses like Mentimeter, for example, or something along those lines where you're constantly, let's put hand up. You can raise your hand in the meeting kind of thing. You can, now we've actually got a whole live piece. It's coming into play for education, and it's now starting to look at flowing over into our sort of the commercial space. There's some really great templates in there. So I'd recommend going and have a look and see the improvements that are coming through. It's got sort of a bit of a fresh design style that's come into play, including pictures that you can drop in and customize a little and crop and work with. So I do like the fact that you can play around with those. There's some great new formats for that easy interpretation of responses to keep it really simple when it comes to this experience. And then there's some of the details around open text responses. So not just the kind of the word cloud. You can actually go and have a look at all of the responses should you wish to, so you can move between the two on the tabs. You can show and hide the QR code. So if you want, you can drop it off, and that way you extend out your information a little bit more. You can expand it out to full screen mode if you're presenting, so that it gets a little bigger. And then you've got your full interactive live experience as part of this environment. Okay. There is a blog that's been put out in regards to sharing. Now, that sharing and collaboration experience in terms of forms, if you're trying to educate, you can always push this out of want to know how to actually collaborate on, your Microsoft Forms a little bit better. They've put a whole blog out around how to. Planner. Planner's had some feature and functionality. You can now bring your planner plans into Microsoft Project for the web. Okay, so you can actually have those coming through. You can create new plans from a template. So there are all these new pre-made templates for Planner that are coming into play. So I do like those new templates. So that's flowing in. There is a Planner loop component. Okay, so in terms of the Planner, you can have loop coming in there. There are now the personal plans in Planner. That one's a little bit more complex because that's actually based on creating it through a Graph API. There's a whole kind of workaround to it to be able to send it out. Personally, I kind of would really, at this point, I'm going to kind of go cross that one off your list. It is not for the average user in any way, shape, or form. It was quite a complex way around to do personal plans at this point. So maybe later we'll come back to that one. And see your recent planner plans now and to-do lists from the homepage. So when you go to that Microsoft homepage, we can often see documents and we can see other things, but we didn't have things like planners and lists. So now that's actually flowing in there as well. So I do like the fact that it's got that flow through for all content. Outlook. Now, the browser extension itself, the way that it used to be, is being retired and it's transitioning over to the new Edge sidebar. So we kind of talked about this when you click on the link in Teams and it would go online, it would keep the chat over in the sidebar. So you're going to see the sidebar coming in to the browser all over the place. You certainly see it already. I know I'm seeing it in my environment. I'm not sure whether you're seeing it in yours, but it will pop up whatever it is in context in the browser to the right-hand side, including Outlook. Okay. Now, some of the things. The new Outlook experience. I have to say, and I have said before, I haven't been, and it's very rare I say things, I haven't been a fan of the new Outlook, just purely because the feature parity was so far behind that it was very difficult. Even things like being able to go send to Teams as a button, for example, wasn't even in there, or send a OneNote, or, some of those feature parity wasn't there. But they are fast moving. I will give them that. Well, kind of fast move, not fast enough for me, but it is coming through. So you can start to see some of what's actually happening. Now, with some of these improvements, things that are coming and flowing in, not quite there. The what's coming is still too much for me. Dictation, for example, message recall, and picture, like just so many things still. And as we said, that Teams tab in search, and there's plenty. There's still quite a bit around delegation as well. In terms of delegation, some stuff. Yeah. And I know message recall hasn't worked unless it's internal inside an organization. Externally, it's never really worked as a message recall anyway. But yeah, goes too many firewalls. Yeah. Okay. Now, what's new to Excel? I've put in the links to some of the previous in here as well, not going through it all, but I think what I loved the most out of them all was the checkboxes in cells. By far, I love it. It's like, yay. Okay. So on the insert tab, it's literally got checkbox and it drops it in a quick and easy without having kind of the developer tab up. But you can't directly go and kind of click and remove them. You have to kind of clear the formats to get rid of it, by the way. So if you're looking at that, might need a little bit of education. Okay. But you can do the checkbox as formatting in a cell, and you can copy and paste them from one to the other and put them into formatted tables and things. I do love that. Okay. Now, Cameo in PowerPoint, it is available now so you can see it in the Outlook, your iOS, so your Apple devices, and on the web. I've had it on in this presentation. It was interesting. It wasn't quite working at first. I'm not sure if it keeps stalling or not. We're having some fun with the new Teams and Cameo. So I'm not sure what the experience has actually been like for you with having it up in the top right-hand corner. It would be great to, hopefully it's not too slow. It's on, but not too slow. Okay, so you can start to then play around with it. Okay, so that Cameo is available for PowerPoint web users and anyone that's in that kind of beta channel. Okay. I thought I might throw this in. Did you know Microsoft Word's just turned 40? I love the little graphic of the journey, and look at the iconography, in terms of the logo over the years. It's like, oh my lordy, I remember all of those. It's hard to believe it's been 40 years. 40 years. Unbelievable. No, it's a good one. It's a good fun one to throw out there. Now, Copilot. Copilot been a mass amount of information that's come out, especially, from Inspire and moving forward, of course, with going live. There is the adoption page as well in regards to Copilot. So there's a ton of stuff on the adoption page, which I have put up previously, so I haven't put it up again for you. Some of us are a little vintage and we do remember the original icon. I know I did too. But anyway, so what I've done is, rather than talking a whole heap about Copilot, I'm going to try and see if for December I can actually get someone to come in for you and speak to Copilot and really kind of untangle it a little bit more for you. Okay, so I'm on the hunt. So if you know anyone who's in the meeting that really knows Copilot and has access to it, I mean, I got access that's come into play for all the different licenses as an MVP. We finally got access to it all just recently. So I'm starting to turn all of that on. And we'll get there, but I'll try and bring someone in. Now, it's always a good idea to know, though, that there are certain components that are not available depending on where you are and the costs around it. Okay, so there is costs around having Copilot and enabling it and all those features and functionality. Okay, it's tough. It's trying to upskill as specialists that we are. There's so many new products that have come out over the last year and a half, between all of the Viva Suite, as well as the Copilots, as well as, premium, and it's getting really, really hard to keep our head around all these various, facets. I do get it. I really do, in terms of upskilling. Now, Clipchamp. Now, it was available for the personal school kind of side of things. I know it is a little bit expensive, I agree, Shari, when you look at the cost and then the investment for Copilot, I agree. But Clipchamp, let's come back. So it is launching for commercial. Yay! Now, one of the big reasons in terms of this is because we're going to start seeing it now coming into things like OneDrive and SharePoint, so that we can actually edit and shorten and trim and do all sorts of things around our videos, and it's going to use Clipchamp and embed it directly into our 365 environment. So another product to talk about with our end users around how they can actually do that moving forward. Okay, I do like Clipchamp. It's I wouldn't say it's a massively complex application, but boy, it actually worked where quite a few of the applications that I had been working with that are complex, it didn't work. And I was a bit shocked at how much it actually worked to fix audio on a video that I was working with, that I had tried 4 or 5 different big products and it didn't. So kudos to Clipchamp there in terms of the way that it actually worked. Putting in text overlays and all sorts of stuff. So that will be embedding in and flowing through into Stream. So the Clipchamp content, okay. It also has some new stock content to be able to create video going in there. So there's a whole heap of new feature functionality there around images and music and shapes and graphics. So if you are playing around with it and you've been in there for a while, you'll start to see that starting to flow in. So you can see it's available. It's only at this point, it's a web-based product, by the way, if you're not familiar, it is a web-based product. So it will come into those licenses. So that's flowing in now. Okay. The WhoBot. So if you've used the WhoBot, it is actually retiring. So that WhoBot is going, I think we're seeing that a little because we've got the People app coming into play, directly embedded in. So that bot is kind of dropping off. Will we see, with Copilot coming in and a few other things of asking questions of it, that might be why. So, yeah. There's always the release notes around Office and what's actually happening. Go and have a look. That keeps you up to date in there. Okay. Events, of course, we've got Ignite this week coming up, not Inspire. Ignite is coming up this week. Lots of great content. A lot of what I'm going through are things that are being announced. There will be some new stuff as well. I would recommend, if you haven't, to at least, if you register, you'll be able to go back and watch some of the recordings. Even if you can't be there at all hours of the night, at least if you register, you can go back and have a look. Okay. I'm gonna drop that page out. Sorry. The community days, I've put in the new screenshot of all the different community days right around the globe. Some are virtual, some aren't. If you happen to be traveling and going there, something to go and join in on. Okay, so there's some good fun sessions there. It's also automatically got the digital workplace conference down the bottom here for New Zealand. If you wanted to, it's registering there. So go and join the New Zealand session. It is the 27th to the 28th of February with the team. Okay. So all my standard content, where do you find all the adoption newsletters and supports and links, and I move these things in and out as I need to. If you ever see a broken link, by the way, maybe you haven't clicked on it in a while, please tell me and I'll take it out or update it if you're going through. So if you do any clicks. So the user groups, there's some that aren't, I have taken a couple out of Sydney. They are no longer running, like the SharePoint user group for Sydney is no longer running. Same with the Microsoft 365 technical is no longer running. I have dropped in the previous recording, so you'll have all those recordings from the past. And our next session is the 5th of December. It is our last one, so it'll be of a Christmas party to say hello. Thank you for those that stayed a little longer. I know we had a ton. I did say, and there was so much that I didn't put in, guys, so much it's not funny. And I just went, no, I've got to leave it there. Please feel free to click on some of the links in the presentation and you can read and dive down a little bit more on some of the features and functionality. If there aren't any questions, you don't want to have a chat with me, or feel free to come off mute, at any point. Then I will let you all go. I think I've answered most of the questions along the way as they've come up. Just say, I don't think there's anyone else. Rishi's dropped in some content for us. Here we go. Andrew. Clarity around places. Okay. Just some questions that he's answered for us. Nothing else. Rightio. Okay, so up the top of the pin chat is where you can go and find the presentation. The recording I will actually bring down for you and have it available at the within a couple of days. I'll drop it into chat for you. It will be in the meetup. I push it out on LinkedIn. I push it out on Twitter. If you don't follow, I always push all that information out across the variety of places. It's just the M365, the Australian M365 Adoption User Group, wherever. All of the details are in the presentation as well if you need to. Thank you very much for coming along, everyone. My lack of sleep over putting this presentation together always does my head in until next month.
Thanks, Kirsty.
You're very welcome, Lynette. Sorry, you're welcome. No, I'll see you in the AMA session indeed, Shari. Won't be long. We'll be doing some more recordings soon. Thank you, Lena. Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you.